Deep Black by Andy McNab. Read by Stephen Pacey. Bosnia, October 1994. From where I was hiding, the bottom of the valley looked like no man's land on the Somme. Acres of churned-up mud. Here and there a dead hand clawed at the sky, pleading for help that had never arrived. The weather was grey and miserable, not yet freezing, but cold enough to have robbed me of a whole lot of body heat over the last 3 days. I was about 100 k's north of Sarajevo, dug into the tree line at the base of a mountain. My hide looked across the valley to what had once been a cement works. The problem for the owners was that it had been a Muslim cement works. The perimeter fence had long since been flattened by Serb tanks, and most of the complex had been reduced to rubble. I'd counted maybe 40 Serb troops through my miniature binoculars, and I could see they were as cold and pissed off as I was. 1 or 2 of Mladic's boys were starting the vehicles so they could get warm inside the cab. I could only guess that, like me, they were waiting for the general's arrival. Ratko Mladic, the commander-in-chief of the Bosnian Serb army, had been supposed to show up the day before, but that hadn't happened. Fuck knows why. Sarajevo had just told me to wait where I was, and that was what I'd do until they told me to lift off the target. I was up to my ears in a Gore-Tex sniper suit, a big bulky overall with a camouflaged outer and a duvet-type lining. I had about 2 days' food left, but being so close to the target, I was on hard routine. I couldn't heat up food or make a brew. Still, at least I was dry. The coffin-shaped scrape I'd dug after moving covertly into the area was about 2 feet deep and covered with camouflage netting. I adjusted it to make sure the objective lens at the front end of the laser target designator, the LTD, had a clear field of view to the factory. When Mladic arrived, I'd call it in. The firm, getting shelled to ship by the Serbs back in Sarajevo, would greenlight a fast jet loaded with a 2,000-pound paveway laser-guided bomb. About 20 minutes later, depending on how long it took the platform to deliver, as we said in the trade, there'd be a top-level vacancy in the Serb High Command. The theory behind this kind of attack was very simple. A jet would come in from behind me, roughly in line with the beam from the LTD, but low, the other side of the mountain, out of sight and sound of the factory. When it was about 9 or 10 miles away, the onboard computer would tell the pilot to pull into a steep climb. At just the right moment, he would let go of the paveway, very much like bowling a ball underarm. By the time it had cleared the mountain, the jet would have turned and be on its way home. After the hit, I'd get the fuck out as quick as I could. The Serbs weren't fools. They knew these precision bomb strikes were man-in-the-loop technology, and they'd be out looking for me. They'd know who was doing it, but would blame the Muslims anyway. After extracting myself from the immediate area, I'd hit a road and become Nick Collins, freelance reporter again. I carried a Sony Hi8 video camera and a Nikon 35mm SLR in my day sack. On the way in, I'd made sure to shoot plenty of local colour. If I was caught, I wanted to look the part. Freelancers like me were 2 a penny out here. Young guys, and the occasional girl, trying to make their fortune with bang-bang pictures and footage that might be good enough to be syndicated round the world. Shouts were coming from the factory. A group of Serbs dressed in a ragbag of uniforms were playing football. They had a new football today. I'd watched as these guys had killed 2 Bosnians the morning before, an old man and a boy of about 15. They'd taken them into the factory. Judging by the screams, they'd interrogated them. Then they brought them out and shot them in the chest. I thought it strange at the time. Why not in the head? That's what normally happened. I found out why at afternoon kickoff. The whole thing over here was a fuck-up from start to finish. I thought about the girl I'd met a few days before, shivering at the roadside with a much older woman. She spoke a bit of English, so I asked their permission to take some photographs to fill up another roll of 36 for my cover story. She smiled shyly and told me her name. "Where you going, Zena?" She motioned down the road. "Sarajevo." What could I say? She was jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. The Serbs had had the place under siege for over 2 years. As well as constant sniper fire, they were lobbing about 4,000 mortar and artillery shells into the city every day. The old woman had been wearing a once-pink anorak, her face barely visible under the fur hood, but I could see in her eyes that she was dying. The girl was still shivering. "Here." I took off my red ski jacket and gloves and handed them over. She thanked me. Then, as if she'd forgotten her plight for a few seconds, she struck a pose, right shoulder towards me, as she zipped up her new jacket. "Kate Moss, no?" I brought the camera up to my eye, but I couldn't bring myself to press the shutter release. Tears were suddenly streaming down her face. She was already back in the real world. The football game had warmed up. Today's ball had mud caked on its matted grey hair and beard. I lowered my binos. I didn't want to see that shit. If they found me, the next head could be mine. I had to be this close because of the mountains behind me. When the LTD fired its laser, the beam would break up at the point it hit the target, giving the splash the paveway would be looking for. I had only one chance of getting Mladic. To maximise the splash, I had to aim the laser at as near to a right angle to the target as possible. I checked again that the alloy tripod was nice and solid. I'd filled 3 plastic bags with mud and slapped them over the legs to keep the beam constant and stable. The sound of engines rumbled up the valley to my right. I raised the binos again as a convoy of 6 mud-covered wagons with canvas backs lumbered towards the factory. As they got closer, I saw the drivers were in Serb uniform. They drove into the compound and turned. I saw heads, many in headscarves, bouncing from side to side, sandwiched between Serb guards. The prisoners weren't just men and women, there were children too. The Serbs who'd been sitting in the back, AKs over their knees, jumped down, smoking and joking with each other. The Muslim civilians clambered out after them, scared and bewildered, wrapped in blankets and all sorts against the cold. Their breath hung around them in a big cloud as they huddled together. The bottle washers stopped playing football. There was a new game in town. They left the head where it was and ambled over towards their weapons. More tailgates dropped, and there was a lot more shouting. Children cried as they were wrenched from their mothers and herded out of sight behind the office block. The remaining men, women and teenagers were split into groups. It wasn't looking good. I checked my watch. It would take the Serbs a good half hour to sort out the prisoners. If I called in the airstrike right now, some of these people might stand a chance, if they survived the blast. But that wasn't the mission. I was here to take a life, not save it. I knew I'd be waking up in a sweat for the next few weeks, feeling a lowlife for not having done anything, but fuck it, we all had to die sometime. My view was blocked for a second by the arrival of the 4x4, an unusually shiny Land Cruiser. The door opened, and out of it came a slight figure with a flowing beard, not very tall. The Serbs couldn't take their eyes off him. I studied him through my binos. In his mid-20s, he wore a Russian-style fur hat and a heavy greenish coat. His body language was confident. The Serb guards parted ranks to let him through. Then there was a shot, a stunned silence, and another shot. 2 of the male prisoners crumpled to the ground. As the truth dawned, the women, segregated a short distance away, began to wail and scream.